Now let's have a look at the Austrian Grand Prix with Stuart Codling. Right, Codders, big weekend for Red Bull. Their home circuit, Max Verstappen, the driver, and a great win.
Marvellous win for him, and it's laid to rest a few of the ghosts from earlier on this season. And it was pretty much a perfect weekend for him. He qualified brilliantly. He made the best of the opening lap. And to me, what was magnificent about that opening lap was he showed the right mixture of circumspection and aggression. He was circumspect at turn one. He let the people ahead of him battle it out. He didn't stick his nose where it shouldn't be. So he survived that. He survived a little bit of a moment at turn three where the Kimster decided he was going to drive off the track and then drive back on at maximum velocity. the devil take the consequences. And then he just nailed Kimi at turn seven. Boom, gave him a little tap. And that really set up his victory when Mercedes threw it in the dumpster.
Going back, though, to qualifying, team orders became a bit of a talking point as a result of what happened there. And then in the race, that projected through to what we saw at Force India and also, to some extent, what could have happened at Ferrari at the end. So team orders, ironically, coming back into the frame at the circuit in which the whole thing began in the first place. But what did you make of all that argy-bargy in qualifying between Daniel and Max?
It was a very peculiar situation because when you first saw it occurring, it was very difficult to understand what was going on. And then you heard the chafing and moaning and, it's his turn to be in front of me. No, it's my turn to be in front of him, all that sort of thing. And it does throw a fascinating light on the internal dynamic in these teams. I think basically Ricciardo was completely in the wrong. It was his turn to make the hole in the air. And for whatever reason, he was breaking discipline and decided not to do it. So he was rightly castigated. He's still a little bit of a dig.
But can I just give a suggestion of what I think probably took place behind the scenes, knowing the way F1 teams work, and particularly Red Bull? Probably at some point before qualifying, Daniel said to his race engineer, or an engineer of importance, I need to have one run when I can at least get a tow around here, otherwise it's a joke. And the engineer probably would have said, yeah, good point, we'll talk about that. And then Daniel probably thought, well, that's all going to happen. And then the engineer probably went to the hierarchy and said, what do you think about this? And the hierarchy either said, difficult problem, let's not deal with it now, or they probably said, no, it's not going to happen. Either way, the message probably didn't get back to Daniel. This is the point, communication within the team. And that's always been slightly edgy at Red Bull, under the heading of Christian Horner's thing, let them race, but they can't touch one another. I still want to see how that is going to manifest itself if they both go into the World Championship in the final round with a chance to win, and the order is race one another, but don't hit one another. Yeah, right. That's where the whole thing stems from, I think, that sort of basic belief.
What's he going to do? Send Dietrich Mateschitz in and do a big Monty Python hand down onto the circuit?
For those of you who don't know Monty Python, it's Nicky Lauder's favourite show on TV, or used to be anyway, when dear Alan Henry was alive. Motoring News interview from about 1971, Nicky saying, yeah, the only thing I come to England for is Monty Python, yeah. Anyway.
Extraordinary. The Spanish Inquisition, very funny.
Thank you, Connors, for that one. Let's move just before we get rid of, before we finish with Max, let's just talk about the other team order situations that were going on. What did you make of Force India saying to Esteban Ocon, let Sergio pass, see if he can have a go at Kevin Magnussen. If not, you can have the position at the end of the race. What do you think of all that?
It's the newfound spirit of cooperation in that team now that they've been threatened with having money taken away.
It's complicated, isn't it? That is quite a serious use of team orders, I think, isn't it?
For me, what teed that situation up was that when the virtual safety car was going down, Force India didn't feel confident enough to double stack the drivers. So Perez ended up on a more difficult strategy that kind of put him at a bit less of an advantage than Ocon.
Yeah, but so that's not Ocon's fault, is it?
Maybe they just felt obliged and they just felt he should be allowed through to have a go.
Or maybe they felt, after everything that's happened between those two, let's try and do something that the team really, have it their way. And it kind of worked. And Checo wasn't too happy at the end of the race, but nonetheless, why would he be happy? Anyway, moving on to Ferrari and the team orders they didn't apply at the end. Well, that was good.
I was actually fascinated to see that because I was waiting for the call to come. As you said, Austria, it wouldn't be the first time we've seen the Ferrari pit wall order their drivers to swap places. And I kind of would have thought they would have done. On the other hand, with Lewis gone, they maybe thought actually there's a bit less of a pressing reason.
Perversely, though, I think that was actually quite bad news for Kimi because if Kimi was in the frame to drive for them in 2019, I think they would have thought, he's our driver, we'll make him slow down and Seb can have the points. But the fact they didn't do that suggests that they're saying, well, he's not going to be with us next year. We'll let him finish P2. Yeah, and have a nice day, Kimi. To me, in the long run, that probably doesn't spell great news for Kimi Räikkönen. But as we've been saying for a long time, we think Charles Leclerc is going to be in that car. And the amazing thing about Mercedes is the first mechanical retirement for two cars in the same race since, I'm sure you know this one, Cotters.
Off the top of my head, Monza 1955.
55. When you were how old?
About -18.
Well, there you go. You know, it's very impressive. I mean, in one way, you can say, isn't it impressive? And then Lewis' run of 33 points finishes comes to an end. Interesting that they, again, for the second race, decided to go to the slightly more conservative tyre for Q2, thinking long-term, conservative choice. We've got a quick car here. Let's run with the super soft rather than the ultra soft, as indeed did Red Bull. But in a way, that kind of ruined their race, because had they been on the ultra soft, there probably wouldn't have been any hesitation about bringing Lewis in at the first safety car. So it's interesting how Mercedes are trying to, being in front, leading a championship, having won championships, a very difficult thing to sustain that. And these are all the issues. When you're behind, you can take the risk, but when you're at the front, Mercedes have to try and be conservative, but not too conservative, and they're second guessing themselves most of the time.
Yeah. You've put your finger right on it there by mentioning risk, and I think Mercedes have become quite risk averse because, well, why would you want to embrace risky strategies when for 4 seasons you've had the best car, you've always had a little bit in your pocket? It's up to the people behind to take the risks.
And that came to its head when the virtual safety car came out, and both Red Bulls were straight in going to soft tyres with a stack stop, a beautiful stack stop. We should give them massive credit for that. And Mercedes wondering whether they should kick him out for a lap longer, and that was the difference. That was the moment the race was lost. Beyond that, when Lewis says things like, so am I P4 now? Have I got to pass these guys in front? It almost makes you think, why aren't the drivers getting involved or being allowed to get more involved with the strategy? Because quite often you hear Lewis saying, why are we doing this? What's happening? And it's as if he's been left out of all the different permutations that's going on. Now, maybe that's because he's not around or doesn't want to be involved in all those meetings that go on beforehand. But all the things we're talking about are innate racing blood decisions that most racers feel, as distinct from committee-operated, slightly removed decisions behind the laptop, not actually seeing and smelling the racing. And that's one of the other things that I often think when I look at Mercedes these days. How much role do the real racers actually play in what's going on? Romain Grosjean seems to be getting into a pattern now. Horrendous race. I've got to pick myself up here. And then driving beautifully. And he did that in Austria, as indeed, of course, did his teammate at Haas, Kevin Magnussen. Great result for the team, particularly for Romain, though, after everything that's been going on recently for him. Beautiful drive. If he's got the credits here and the debits there, where is he now in your mind, Cotters?
Blimey, Formula One double-entry bookkeeping. I think it was a very strange race because it was almost unobtrusively brilliant, wasn't it? You only really saw him when he was whining on the radio in the Grosjean style about drivers ahead not obeying blue flags.
All credit to Craig Scarborough, though, because he did point out a couple of weeks ago how much work Haas have been doing recently and how constant their development is on the car. So all credit to them for that. But much more importantly, where are you at in terms of adopting some of the recipes from Grosjean's cooking book and serving them to your loved ones?
I'm quite some distance away from that because having read his book, I do take issue with some of his methodologies. For instance, one of the recipes is fish cooked on papillote, which, as any fool knows, means a brown paper parcel. He does it in foil. So one of these days I'm going to take him up on that.
And Fernando Alonso, excellent drive from the pit lane. Sounds wonderful when you say that. Why was he in the pit lane, though? Because he damaged sufficient number of front wings to start with a non-Parc Fermé approved front wing and therefore had to be in the pit lane. Fernando, if he hadn't damaged so many front wings, he could have beaten the Haas's.
But he did manage his tyres brilliantly. And
he did.
What was interesting was the way Leclerc said, after Alonso went past him, he, Charles, learned a lot from watching the way Alonso was managing his tyres, and it was almost like a masterclass in time management. He then had to allow Ericsson pass to have a go, which didn't work.